Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Evil West on PS5. I've talked quite a lot on this show about the history behind games, the history behind the history, and the history of games that are period pieces that reflect back on the plot or nature of the game. Now it's time to indulge in a bit of historic fantasy with the most thin of veneers, and perhaps with one of my most favorite periods in history. Today I'm talking about 2022's Evil West. There have been a few times where I've spoken about the Wild West, the historic period from roughly about 1820 to 1900, a period of intense westward expansion across what would become the continental United States, especially after the discovery of the Cumberland Gap in 1750 and the technological improvements that would help improve wagon technology and the crossing of the Mississippi River, along with post-Civil War policies and waves of new European immigrants that would funnel hundreds of people towards what would eventually become California, and the discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in 1848 that would make such migrations stick. Of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention the destructive effects such expansionist policies under the lace umbrella of Manifest Destiny would have upon the native tribes, the environment, immigration from China instead of Europe, international relations with Mexico and Canada, and many other things large and small. But at this point, there is nothing we can do about any of that, whether you like it or not. All previous times I have been more historically precise have been in relation to other games set in the Wild West, such as Gun or Red Dead Redemption. In addition, there have been many times I have talked about horror-themed games, especially where the plot of the game revolves around vampires, such as Blood Omen Legacy of Kain or Vampire the Masquerade Redemption. In the body of Evil West, those two themes collide head-on in an explosive, no-holds-barred cheese fest of extraordinary magnitude. Evil West is listed online as a third-person shooter, and yeah, it has parts of that. But when have I ever agreed with what the soundbites online have to say? Evil West is more like a God of War clone, with plenty of guns and the super-powered right fist of the protagonist, one Jesse Retner, as he hunts vampires at the behest of the United States government across the expanding Western territories. Let me explain. It is the late 1800s, during the administration of President Grover Cleveland. The Retner Institute, founded by William Retner, a Civil War officer who saw combat against more than just human opponents during that time, work in secret for the government and are funded directly by the Office of the President to fight against creatures of the night, vampires in particular. Jesse, the founder's son and top agent, is a new breed of roughneck, a little too much like the video game heroes of the early 2000s than a man fit for the 1800s in that snarling, post-teenage, fuck you mom and dad, my tummy hurts and I'm mad at the government sort of way. Jesse and his old mentor and retired agent Edward Grevner meet an informant, a turncoat vampire, who has been smuggling blood and lower-powered vampires into this back country of vague U.S. territory for the highborn vampires, who inform them that one highborn vampire has had a plan that could change the face of the West forever. Vampires in Evil West are called the sanguisoj, those that have found their calling in accepting the quote-unquote gift of change in blood and now prey on humans. The Retner folks just call them ticks instead. Anyway, one ticked, named Peter DeBano, has decided to conduct a mass casualty event to create more vampires, and do so quickly before human technology grows too powerful and wipes vampires out for good. The vampire leadership rejects this plan, as they see it as too dangerous for their own kind, and for good measure, they condemn DeBano and all his vampire spawn to true death. Jesse and Edgar arrive at this meeting and ambush DeBano and his adopted vampire daughter Felicity, and then kill DeBano, taking his head back to the Retner Manor, but Felicity escapes. Once back, father and son Retner argue intensely, as they often do, about their approach to the family business. right before they are about to debut a new item for vampire killing, an electrified gauntlet. During the event, Felicity and a small army of vampires attack the Institute and kill most of the staff and take Dabano's head back. The elder Retiner is wounded by Felicity in the attack, and the remaining staff flee back to their office in the town of Calico. From there, they will be investigating further attacks on western towns by Felicity and other Retiner Institute outposts while rebuilding what they can, all while being harangued by a man named James Harrow, who has recently been promoted to Secretary of War in the wake of the events of the destruction of the Institute, and who threatens to shut the Institute down at every second. These attacks are not random, however. Felicity is still enacting her adopted father's plan by using vampire glamours and leeches of unusual and supernatural size to drain the blood from pre-Columbian monsters to evolve vampires under her control faster, and to evolve the foul bloods, humans working with vampires, into powerful underlings. Every place Felicity has attacked is one of those places where an ancient hell beast is buried beneath it. Worse, William Retiner is infected by Felicity's blood, and he's turning into a vampire. He is physically linked to Felicity, and psychically linked to Felicity as well. So everything he knows about hunting vampires and the Institute's plans, Felicity now knows. Harrow is demanding William be slain before he can divulge too much more. But our hero Jesse decides he just doesn't want to kill his dad, and hangs his hope upon finding an herb said to be able to cure vampirism, the fabled La Orchid de la Vida, a weed so preposterously named it simply has to work. So every mission becomes a race against time on two fronts. They do find the orchid and make it a cure, which lasts for a little while, at least. Until later, when William turns anyway and kills more of the staff at the Calico Institute chapter house. Harrow, despite his bluster, is useless and in fact hinders most of their operations, and things are coming apart at the seams by the end. In the investigations and the missions to keep repairing this experimental gauntlet and upgrading it, they discover that Felicity has an entire railroad network at her command, as it was a false and illegal holding of Dabano, and has been using it to send monsters all over the country in preparation of the war on humanity. She herself is headed towards Washington, D.C., to attack and turn President Cleveland into a ghoul under her control as he attends the opera. And Harrow will be there with the minimum security because he's a complete moron in a way only the Peter Principle could explain. Jesse and friends arrive as Felicity is attacking the opera house, and they are able to save the president and kill Felicity, who has gone insane and mutated out of control on this ancient monster blood. Harrow tries to claim that this was all part of his plan, but the Institute survivors have already warned the president of Harrow's deception and attempts to profit off the impending calamity, and we get a happy ending of the sorts as the Rentier Institute begins to rebuild under Jesse's leadership. The overall mechanics for Evil West are simple as far as exploration goes. It is a stage-by-stage grind between arena monster battles, where you get tons of pretty vistas of traditional Western and Southern vistas, or at least what we think of in pop culture when we see them reinforced in movies, so that you can poke around a little bit for secrets, mostly a few shiny cosmetics for your outfit or guns. But it is, for all intents and purposes, God of War 2018, but as if Kratos were wearing a 10-gallon hat and duster. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but in the very best way, in fact. Developer Flying Wild Hog Studios really studied that combat loop of that game and, in my opinion, nailed it. It is a wild action set piece after wild action set piece, punching vampires and other monsters as viscerally as possible, in between filling them with more hot lead than a pencil factory, and then stuffing grenades up their asses for good measure. As far as the story, well, it is goofy B-movie fare. But as I have said, I have trash taste to begin with, so I was all in. This is like a Peter Jackson script. Early days Peter Jackson, when the highlights of his career were flicks like Bad Taste or Brain Dead, or Dead Alive for us here in the States. It's all gore and vampires and werewolves and fringe leather chaps with six-shooters snarling at the camera, while buff comic book heroes that look like they were Joe Madureira sketches in digital form, and women with more impossible curves than an Audubon growl one-liners so ridiculous you can't help but chuckle and cheer. So was Evil West successful in what it set out to do? Well, if it was to be a solid AA title, then yes, it absolutely did. As I've said, every game does not need to be a big budget AAA material game to be good, and this is one is good despite all the bullshit of the game industry. Sure, it rips the absolute fuck off of the aforementioned God of War, or Devil May Cry, or probably half a dozen other titles, but who cares? The developers did it well, and that is what matters. But it is not, and do not let anyone tell you otherwise, a horror game, despite the vampires and shit. They are more like action set dressing in this oddball one-off Western. Jesse is no traditional Western movie hero, but more of a throwback into the ultra-masculine era of games heroes of 20 years ago. Yet I couldn't hate him in his cardboard one-sidedness. He's a vampire-killing himbo who just wanted his dad to be proud of him. The critics gave this game mixed to average to generally favorable reviews, depending on which platform you played it on. And the scores for the monolith that is Metacritic put Evil West in the mid-70s. So a solid game, even under the jaundiced eye of the critics. And since that's all I could be arsed to find as far as review scores and critical input, so thank the gods at least, the less these numeric score gifting jerk-offs have to say, the better. But Evil West has afforded me to talk a little bit about something I would like to see more of often in the games. Wild-ass Wild West stories. You see, dear listener, I've talked before in my history with tabletop role-playing games. And one of those role-playing games which changed my outlook on fiction is the game Deadlands. Deadlands is an alternate history game where in the year of 1863, the world changed forever when the gates of hell were thrown open by a vengeful native shaman, and the four horsemen of the apocalypse were let loose upon the West. And cowboys and gunslingers were gifted magic, and all the legendary monsters human ever created and feared suddenly became real, sticking to the shadows and causing the world to become a realm of horror. For over 20 years, Deadlands has shaped a lot of my thinking about the blending of genres, fiction, historic fiction, and just crazy shit in general. I and the world owe its creator, Shane Hensley, a debt of gratitude, which is pretty good for a man who left TSR Games before it got bought out by Wizards of the Coast and was inspired by a painting of a Confederate uniformed vampire created by artist Gerald Brom. A lot of people who know me personally often ask me when we get a Western game of some sort of a supernatural edge to it that comes out, whether or not it has recreated that Deadlands feel. And that is hard to say, as Deadlands' tabletop game can be a lot of things depending on who runs it. It can be a straight-up Western without monsters, a fantasy story minus the dwarves and elves but full of guns and magic and steampunk, or an outright tale of mind-altering horror set in the Old West, where the protagonists fight a doomed battle against Chthonian nightmares with their wits, folklore, and cult revolvers. How can any video game ever hope to cover that breadth of scope? Evil West is not this style of game. Maybe the magic, monsters, and steampunk, but it is an action game in a Western skin. Games that did Deadlands feel better were more recent titles like Weird West, which I'll be talking about at some point, Blood West, or even the long ago game Dark Watch, which was a PS2 FPS vaguely scary shooter with Wild West overtones. But as I said, none of this is anything bad about Evil West. Evil West is like a mixed bag of Skittles and shell casings. Bright, sweet, but it will leave the taste of burnt powder in your mouth, and probably break a tooth if you bite the wrong thing. If there were ever to be a game that captured the correct feel of Deadlands tabletop as a game, it would have to be a Resident Evil 2 remake style, over-the-shoulder third-person horror story with actual moments of dread and hard-to-kill critters unless you find the right ammunition, weapons, or just a bit of tech and magic combined while having to explore Ghost Town or something similar. That's just my opinion, though. And since the game industry doesn't listen to a word I say and no one is interested in making something like that, then it will remain in the realm of dreams. But hey, if there are any non-scummy, non-con artist developers out there listening to this show who are looking for a few ideas for the next project, feel free to message me online, guys. I've got a few ideas for you to make money off of that I'd be happy to talk with you about. But what more can I say about Evil West? Honestly, this is another good game. It's double A to be sure, but it is really exceptional. Smooth combat, great art, simple systems, even gentle level ups that allow you to access new combat tactics or abilities for the various guns, explosives, punching upgrades, and even a crossbow that you'll find along the way. The villains are cartoonish and overblown and just pitch perfect for this type of silliness. Some of the twists are obvious, but again, B-grade movie writing. So if you come into this game with that understanding that this is the kind of flick where you are supposed to cheer for the heroes and boo the bad guys while flinging popcorn at the screen, then you'll have a good time for about 10 to 12 hours. Publisher Focus Entertainment, previously Focus Home Entertainment, have placed themselves as a great AA publisher in recent years, and I have covered several of their titles of late. Evil West is another one. Maybe we'll get a sequel, maybe not, but this is another one of my approved games where I don't have much bad to say about it other than it sticks too close to formulas done by AAA developers. And I guess that's not such a bad thing after all. So load up on the wooden stakes and silver bullets, grab your best hat and long coat, and get ready to walk into the sunset after your prey. Going west, young man, sometimes comes with more than you planned for. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orton Wells, and Mass Llama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves Podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.